Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was sent to another realm by a goddess. To save an entire world from a madman, one goddess has given the Kages a means to send Naruto to another realm. Will Naruto be able to discover Kushina's divine identity, and can he survive the challenges of being her son? Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel, and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard. Chapter 30. Naruto knelt in front of his mother's statue in cabin 2 with the altar lit, and he reflected on his upcoming quest. Finding and securing the Yata no Kagami would not be a picnic by any stretch of the imagination. The mirror could be as dangerous as Medusa's gaze. Added to that was the fact that he would no doubt have to come down hard on Issei to keep him from getting his entrance into the Einherjar approved far earlier than his mother wanted. Naruto knew that his fellow Once was a good-hearted teen, and was better than most in his age bracket for fighting in close. However, Issei's fatal flaw was without a doubt excessive libido, and this flaw could really be fatal for him on this quest. He was also unsettled because of the lack of hard information on hand to use in preparing for the quest. Even when he and his friends were sent off to try and rescue Sasuke from the Sound 4, they had more information to go on. At least on that hastily created mission they knew the lay of the land, exactly who their target was, and had a general idea of what they were up against. This quest would have Naruto working with an ad hoc team, going after unknown objectives to retrieve the Yata no Kagami, and only general ideas about where these objectives are located. Yes, this quest was heading straight into Fubar land, and Naruto did not like it at all. It would be one thing if this quest was simply snafu. He did snafu missions outside of Konoha so often that they practically reserved missions likely to go snafu for him and his team. A knock at the cabin door broke Naruto out of his musing. He quickly stood up, went to the door, and opened it. Artemis was standing outside with worry written on her face. The goddess lowered her head slightly and forced out the words, "Can I please be granted permission to enter cabin 2, Naruto?" All of the cabins at Camp Half-Blood were specifically dedicated to a particular deity. Ever since the Medusa incident and the Tartarus Athena raised over it, all gods and goddess were forbidden to enter an area specifically dedicated to another deity unless they received permission from the area's caretaker. At Camp Half-Blood, the caretaker for each cabin under this law was the cabin's counselor. Mr. D always made a sadder go-get-a-camper who was in their cabin rather than humiliating himself by asking for entry. Artemis didn't find it humiliating since she liked her privacy, and was willing to return the favor. However, she did find it all pointless given Athena's reason for pushing through the law, as Medusa was the caretaker of that temple, and she did invite Poseidon into it in the first place. Almost immediately, Naruto stepped to the side and said, "Sure, Artemis." The goddess quickly entered the cabin, and Naruto politely closed the door behind her. This was the first time Artemis had been in another cabin, and she took a moment to look around. It was a little surprising to see a cabin set up for only one person, but then it wasn't like Hera needed to set the cabin up for anyone before Naruto was born. The only reason her cabin had beds in it was so that her hunters had a place to rest. Just as Artemis finished looking around, Naruto pulled out the chair by his desk and said, "Here you go." "Sorry, there aren't many options for sitting in here, Artemis, but it is usually just me who's in the cabin. It's not like whoever is inspecting the cabin spends time sitting down." Once Artemis had sat down, Naruto sat down on the floor facing her. Artemis calmly said, "After discussing it with my hunters, it's been decided that Zoe will accompany you on this quest, Naruto. Will that be a problem for you?" Naruto shook his head and replied, "That won't be a problem for me at all. Having a team member with her abilities and experience will be extremely helpful. I'll be perfectly honest with you, Artemis, I don't like this quest at all. Going on any quest or mission with as little solid information as we have at the moment is just begging for trouble. I'm hoping some of my contacts will have some helpful information to give me when Zoe and I go to collect Issei. I don't think they'll have any helpful information at this time, but I can hope." Artemis nodded her head when she heard this. In all honesty, she really didn't like the idea of this quest going after something with such limited information. Almost every quest issued since the gods had left Greece had tons of supporting information that a half-blood could use if they bothered to look it up. Even in the heroic age, the heroes who completed the first remembered quests had information from locals about the monster or item they were after. That a fair minority of quests failed because the quest members didn't collect the information they needed did not bother her at all. Those half-bloods had the information they needed waiting at their fingertips, and didn't try to collect it, so they deserved their fate. Naruto and Zoe were going on quest with limited information in spite of Naruto's efforts to gather said information. The lack of action in the one situation and the action taken in this situation made all of the difference. While looking down at her intended fiancé, Artemis felt her heart get tugged with worry. Feelings that Artemis still had trouble acknowledging, let alone accepting as part of herself, started to bubble up within her concerning Naruto. She looked into his worried and yet collected eyes for a few seconds. The goddess of the hunt knew that she needed to say something for her own peace of mind, but she couldn't allow herself to acknowledge the words she would need to say. Finally, she was able to say, "Please take care of yourself and Zoe for me, Naruto. I want to see you both come back from this quest safely." Naruto nodded his head and replied, "Don't worry, Artemis. I've gotten out of several dicey situations on tough missions in the past. Zoe's got tons of experience and skill to spare, as you know. Together, we should be able to see this quest through." Zoe tightly hugged Naruto as she sat behind him on his 8-legged speed demon from Tartarus. Bucephalus was carrying the duo at supersonic near hypersonic speeds towards Alaska. Naruto was using his wind chakra manipulation to help protect the riders and steed from the wind they were generating. Even with Naruto cutting down on the winds assaulting them, Zoe still had to bury her face into his back to protect her face. How Naruto was able to put up with the winds he would be dealing with as the front rider was something Zoe couldn't fathom. Just the side winds were like a torrent of knives against her skin, and she was desperately trying to hide herself in the windbreak Naruto's body created. They had left camp just over an hour ago to make the nearly 4,000-mile journey back to Naruto's home in Alaska. Bucephalus was pushing himself in order to go so fast even with Naruto help his steed. At Bucephalus's current speed they were expected to arrive in another 15 to 20 minutes. Part of Zoe was impressed by the 8-legged horse's speed and sheer endurance to maintain this kind of speed. Her lady's reindeer maintained a much slower pace when they made their nightly journey across the sky, and they were the closest that Zoe could compare Bucephalus's speed and endurance to in her mind. Bucephalus rapidly slowed down to a normal trot when the duo and steed got to within a few miles of Naruto's town. Naruto turned off his wind shield and pulled out a scroll with a complicated seal on it that he quickly activated. Zoe felt the hair on the back of her neck rise as a barrier of some sorts activated. Naruto quickly put the scroll away and said, "There, now we can talk without worrying about any Olympians who aren't in the know sticking their noses into things they aren't ready to know. Zoe, what I'm about to tell you has been kept quiet by my mother, Artemis, and I. You'll have to keep this information under your hat even more than you keep the existence of the Romans quiet from the Greek half-bloods." The rest of their trip to the town was spent with Naruto explaining to a shocked Zoe about the existence of the other pantheons in general and the North Pantheon in particular. Naruto kept the existence of the Council of Regents a secret since there was no reason for Zoe to know about them at this time. That was a good thing because Zoe was having trouble processing the fact that there were other pantheons in existence. It was the closest she had ever come to experiencing what a half-blood or a clear-sighted mortal felt when they learned about the gods' existence. Thanks to a little mist manipulation, no one paid attention as Naruto and Zoe rode down the roads on Bucephalus to the Hayata household. Zoe was initially worried when she heard the sounds of swords clashing against each other, but Naruto was calm. He quickly led Bucephalus so that the duo could look at the backyard and confirm his beliefs. Rosweiss and Sally were in the backyard having a sword match for training. Zoe took the chance to watch the two women spar and quickly analyze their abilities. Rosweiss was a master swordswoman, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It was also obvious to her that Rosweiss was holding back just enough to get Sally a good workout and help improve Sally's skill. As Zoe watched Sally spar, she was surprised to see her almost visibly getting better at fighting before her eyes. It reminded the hunter of what she saw when she occasionally spotted Naruto and Percy training, even if Sally's improvement wasn't as fast as Percy's. Soon enough, the two mothers noticed the onlookers and put a halt to their training. Sally quickly sheathed her sword in its sheath and called out, "Good morning, Naruto. What are you doing here away from Camp Half-Blood? Who is your friend and how is Percy doing?" Naruto quickly dismounted from his steed while taking care not to knock Zoe off. He then called out, "Good morning to you too, Mrs. Jackson, and you, Mrs. Hayadu. I'm here on a quest with Zoe here as one of my companions. We're here because we've been told to pick up the third quest member in the north, and Issei is the only one who fits the bill for the third companion, unless you know of another Valkyrie living nearby with a child, or a child of a Valkyrie." Rosweiss shook her head. "No Annis with Valkyrie blood besides Issei currently lives in North America. Most Valkyries prefer to wait on children until their lover is in Einherjar. The nearest other one that I know of lives in Kamchatka, Russia, and he is currently serving in the Russian Air Force. If you can keep my son in line, I have no problems with sending him off with you on a quest. The Norns know it might do him some good. Your first task will be getting him out of his room though." Rosweiss said this last bit with a mischievous smile. It was well known among those in the mythical know around town that it was almost impossible to get Issei away from his smut in summer outside of his daily exercise, and the additional summer exercises his mother put him through every other day. A prankster smirk appeared on Naruto's face as he looked at the Valkyrie. Naruto quickly retrieved another scroll and opened it to a particular storage seal. He then activated the seal, causing a small remote to appear in a puff of smoke. Naruto's smirk grew as he grabbed the remote and pressed a particular button. Zoe was starting to dismount from Bucephalus, and was startled when she heard a voice loudly wail out in agony. "It burns. What the hell? Why is there obese gay midget porn on my computer? Where did all of the beautiful breasts go?" Naruto's smirk grew even wider as Issei started to cuss up a storm, while Rosweiss shook her head in embarrassment. Occasionally, Issei would complain that the sight before him burned as the black box Naruto had attached to his computer cycled through ever more disturbing deviant sites. Naruto and Arnold got the box made by the local computer club by using up a few favors. Eventually, Issei gave up trying to regain his porn and started to come downstairs in a foul mood. He walked outside, spotted Naruto, and immediately rushed at the shinobi. Issei launched a nasty punch at Naruto which was ducked. Naruto retaliated by grabbing Issei's outstretched arm and flipping him over. The shinobi followed through by sitting down on Issei's back and saying, "Good to see you too, Issei. Now that you're done looking at porn, you can join Zoe and me on a quest to help save the Western Pantheon." 30 miles north of Victoria in British Columbia, the trio on the quest to find the Yata no Kagami were setting up camp for the night. Tomorrow they planned to be in Seattle, Washington, and to hopefully find their first clue among the Amazons. Bucephalus was grazing on the edge of the camp while Skullsplitter, Rosweiss's raven-winged wolf and steed that she had lent to Issei, gnawed on the leg of a deer Zoe had caught for their dinner. One of Naruto's clones was roasting the rest of the deer over an open flame, as the other clones set up various barriers and traps around the camp. Naruto himself was setting up his tent around the campfire just like Issei and Zoe were setting up their tents. Once Naruto got his tent up, he turned to the side and glanced at the setting sun. He then turned back to the center of the camp where his clone was cooking dinner. The clone spotted him and called out, "Hey boss. Since you're done pitching your tent, could you open up a can of beans?" Naruto rolled his eyes at his clone's laziness before he got up and opened up a can of beans. He then walked over to his clone and handed over the can so that the beans could be cooked. The clone poured the can into a cast iron pot and placed the pot in a holder so that it could be cooked by the campfire. Naruto kept his eye on the clone for a minute to make sure it didn't try to add something extra to the beans as a prank. That had happened one time on his training trip with Jiraiya, and as a result all of the animals in the forest they were in had needed to clear out. Issei had finished setting his tent up just as Naruto was sure his clone wasn't going to prank the beans. The Valkyrie-blooded Once almost immediately pulled out a copy of Maxim, and happily started to read it in front of his tent, oblivious to the daggers Zoe was glaring at him. Naruto noticed this and fought the urge to sigh. Making sure Zoe didn't kill Issei over the boy's choice in reading material would undoubtedly be one of the hardest challenges for Naruto on this quest. Yes, Naruto had been well aware that this would be an issue when he and Zoe set out. However, he wanted to know why the Norns, or the Fates, felt it was necessary for his friend to constantly test Zoe's limited patience for perverted boys. For his uncle's sake, Zoe was already starting to get that telltale twitch in her hand that showed up when she wanted to shoot someone or something. For her part, Zoe was silently praying to Artemis for the patience to deal with Issei. Zoe knew that she had a low tolerance for males, even for a hunter. This wasn't at all surprising given her history with Heracles and her experiences during the time when Aphrodite tried to destroy the hunt. Naruto had her grudging respect and acceptance because of his actions. The younger boys at Camp Half-Blood had her toleration, since they typically didn't bother or annoy the hunters when they stayed at camp. However, Issei was rapidly burning away what patience Zoe could summon to put up with him. In an attempt to keep herself from stabbing Issei, Zoe turned to look at the real Naruto and called out, "Naruto." She waited a second for Naruto to look at her before continuing. "What is it exactly that the Fates have us retrieving from them? I'm starting to suspect that this item comes from a different pantheon given how discreet you have been about this item." One thing that Zoe did like about spending the past 2 summers at Camp Half-Blood was that it had improved her ability to speak modern English tremendously. Naruto looked at Zoe, and then glanced at Issei to see his perverted friend had actually put down his magazine to look at him as well. The shinobi Half-Blood sat down a third of the way between the campfire and his tent, with the campfire being closer to him. In a firm and authoritative voice, Naruto said, "We are on a quest to retrieve the Yata no Kagami. This item is the ultimate example of a Shinjukyo, or deity and beast mirrors in English. From what I've been told, the Yata no Kagami was kept under guard by the Eastern Pantheon before it was somehow stolen a few months ago. This item might be a mirror, but it is extremely dangerous. Just having your image come into view of the reflective side of this mirror can potentially permanently change someone, and that is only the most benign result. The Yata no Kagami can bring anything about a person to the surface, including the evil that rests in one's heart. Furthermore, the mirror's powers will work on anyone from the strongest deity to an insect and everything in between." Both companions' faces paled as Naruto's words sunk in. They both realized just how dangerous the Yata no Kagami could be. Silence descended on the camp as Issei and Zoe fully absorbed everything that Naruto had told them. Slowly their color began to return to them just as Naruto's clone finished cooking dinner. The clone silently passed out everyone's dinner before it vanished in a puff of smoke. The next day the trio came to Seattle and headed towards the Amazons. Zoe was put in the lead for this leg of the journey since she knew where the right entrance to Amazon's base was. There were 2 ways one could meet with the Amazons: the humiliating way and the dignified way. The humiliating way involved either sneaking into protected areas or causing a scene so that the Amazonian guards would knock you out and take you prisoner. Not a good way to make a favorable impression on the Amazons when one needed to ask them for a favor. The dignified way to meet the Amazons involved going to a hidden entrance at the Amazons' headquarters for. It was set up by the Amazons so they could receive visitors of the mystical variety. As the trio approached the hidden entrance, the Amazon on duty was busy reading a magazine and blowing bubbles with her chewing gum. Everyone on the quest was a little disappointed to see that the guard they were approaching was completely oblivious to their presence. To be fair to the Amazon guard, no one had used the entrance in decades. Naruto's prankster instincts quickly reared their head, and it was fueled by his annoyance at someone disregarding their duties in such a brazen manner. He quickly pulled out a scroll, unsealed a gong, and punched the gong right next to the guard's ears. Zoe wanted to roll her eyes at Naruto's antics. However, she found the sight of the Amazon jumping 3 feet into the air in shock too hilarious to seriously complain about. The gong was resealed by the time the Amazon landed back on the ground. It was almost comical to watch as the Amazon guard started breathing rapidly with a full blush on her face and bubblegum in her hair. Once the guard noticed the trio, she slumped on her desk in embarrassment. When the guard regained control of her face, she looked up at the trio and said, "Who are you and why do you wish to visit the Amazon nation?" Naruto stepped forward and said, "My name is Naruto Uzumaki, son of the goddess Hera, on a quest with Zoe Nightshade, lieutenant of the hunt, and Issei Hyudu, a half-blood from beyond Olympus, as my companions. We wish to visit the Amazon nation because we have been informed by a prophecy given by the fates that a clue to completing our quest is likely hidden among your people. Can such a visit be arranged soon?" The fates stressed that this quest needs to be completed quickly when they personally delivered the prophecy to me. The Amazon's face paled and her eyes widened in shock when she heard that the fates were directly involved in this quest. She quickly pulled out her touchpad and rapidly texted a message to her superiors. There was a minute wait before she got a response. Once the guard read the response, she looked up at the trio. In a firm manner she said, "A security group will be coming here shortly to escort you to meet with the queen. You can discuss this matter with her." About 3 minutes later, a squad of 7 Amazons exited out of the hidden entrance. The gate guard immediately stood up and saluted the leader of the approaching squad. The leader nodded her head and said, "At ease, soldier." Once the guard was at ease, the squad leader turned to look at the trio. She gave Naruto a neutral look, Zoe a respectful look of one leader to another, and gave Issei a guarded look. There was just something about Issei that the squad leader, and the Amazons in general, found revolting, like he was some sort of leper. The squad leader returned her gaze to Naruto and said, "We will escort you to the queen so that you may discuss with her why your quest has brought you here. As you are visiting us in the proper manner, you will be permitted to keep your weapons on your persons while in the queen's presence. However, any move to draw said weapons will see you killed by either my squad or one of the other guards' women. You will also be slain where you stand if you attempt to use any special powers or items you have inherited or received from your parents. Do you understand me?" Naruto nodded his head and said, "We understand and accept the terms to meet with your queen. Taichi willing, we will be able to find the clue we need here quickly and be able to be on our way." The squad of Amazons then formed around the trio, and the squad leader led them into the hidden entrance. Once the group passed through the entrance, they found themselves walking down a long hall. The hall itself was covered in frescoes showcasing the Amazons' history. There were several corridors that the group had to go through in a winding manner in order to reach the queen's chamber. The queen's chamber was a massive hall with a floor of marble along with frescoes-covered walls and ceiling. The trimmings of the room were polished amber carved into floral patterns which complemented the marble mosaics on the floor. Naruto and his companions couldn't get a good view of the frescoes on the wall, because of all of the Amazon guards standing at attention. Between the guards and the center of the room were 24 bronze life-size statues of the most important queens to rule the nation. The queen herself sat on an ivory throne that was on the far side of the chamber from where the trio and their guards entered. The guards lead the trio towards the queen after giving them a chance to process the magnificent room they were in. Everyone stopped about 5 feet away from the throne, and the squad leader quickly bowed her head. After the bow, the squad leader spoke, "Here are the visitors, Queen Sabrina." Sabrina nodded her head with a guarded expression on her face. She was not used to dealing with outsiders in this chamber, since usually the only non-Amazons she had to deal with were trespassers. Said trespassers were typically sentenced to hard labor or death, and so she dealt with them in the prison section of the nation's compound. The fact that the people in front of her were on a quest, and one that was apparently issued by the fates themselves, made things delicate to say the least. Artemis's second-in-command being present made things even more complicated, since that meant that Olympus would paying close attention to this quest. It was never a good thing for the Amazons to have the attention of Olympus, since the Amazons almost always ended up worse off when everything was said and done. This fact was only amplified now that the Amazons ran a black market between the Roman and Greek parts of the mythical West. To buy herself some time to think, Sabrina pulled out her touchpad and reviewed the text message that the guard had sent. Sabrina glanced up after reading one part of the message and said, Mr. Uzumaki, I would like you to clarify a point for me before we start our discussion in depth. According to the message that was sent to me, you claimed that a clue to completing our quest is likely hidden among your people. What leads you to suspect that your quest has anything to do with the Amazons? While I am grateful that you know how to ask my people properly, I do find myself concerned at the thought of a half-blood quest involving my people, since they tend to not go well for my people. Naruto quickly replied, we were told by the fates that one of the clues we're looking for will be among warriors hiding in plain sight. Can you think of another group of warriors that hides from regular mortals using a hiding location named after them? Sabrina sighed and answered, I cannot, Mr. Uzumaki. Therefore, I am willing to help you locate this clue you seek that is among my people. Now, will you please tell me what your quest is after Sabrina was cut off in mid-sentence by a dart that hit her chest. The queen's body immediately started to convulse, and she started to hack up blood. Instantly, the queen's chamber became a powder keg of fear and concern. This powder keg exploded when one of the guards shouted out as Sabrina fell to the ground, the queen has been assassinated. It was like a switch had been flipped as the fear and concern of the guards became rage, and a desire for vengeance that was directed to the only target in the guards' sights. Unfortunately for the trio, they were the only target in sight for the Amazons. Naruto saw the Amazons draw their blades and muttered, Taichi, you are a complete bitch. Naruto quickly grabbed his kanabo and slammed it into the chest of the nearest Amazon. He then grabbed 3 shuriken, laced them with wind chakra, and threw them at 3 other Amazons. At the same time, Zoe had drawn her hunting knives and ducked under an incoming attack. She retaliated by driving one of her knives into her assailant's stomach, and then twisting the blade up into the assailant's rib cage. Off to the side, Issei got his gauntlets on and deflected an incoming arrow. He dropped to the floor in order to sweep the 2 incoming Amazons. As the 2 Amazons hit the floor, Issei stood up, and then killed them by punching their noses into their brains. Things were quickly turning in the favor of the trio, as they fought against the Amazons. Naruto created a dozen clones, and had them charge at the guards at the far end of the chamber. Issei and the real Naruto soon started to work to get the Amazons off of Zoe. The trio got a second of breathing room thanks to the clones. During this break, Naruto looked at Zoe and pointed to one of the walls. She quickly realized Naruto's idea, and then ran up the wall. Zoe ran up until she was close to the roof before she stopped to put away her hunting knives and drew her bow. With Zoe as the team sniper, Naruto and Issei charged towards the remaining Amazons that were regrouping by the chamber's main door. The last 2 Amazons pulled away from the door to try and give themselves some more room to maneuver. Naruto called out, I'll seal the room while you 2 capture one of them. After saying this, Naruto broke away from Issei and pulled out a blank notebook. He quickly wrote a seal on it and pressed the seal against the doors in front of him. This process was completed 2 more times before the room was secured. Naruto turned around to see that Issei had managed to chain up the 2 Amazons. However, the ninja quickly diverted his eyes as the Amazons had somehow lost their clothes in fight with Issei. Zoe jumped off of the wall and started marching over to Issei with murder in her eyes. She had witnessed Issei's fight with the 2 Amazons, and saw how his attacks caused his opponent's clothes to fall apart. As Zoe neared the only other remaining living beings in the room, Naruto fought off the urge to shake his head. They hadn't even found the first clue yet, and there was already a bloodbath on their hands. Hopefully, Taichi had cooled off, or this quest might see the destruction of the Amazon nation. Chapter 31. Zoe grabbed Issei by his shirt collar and started to violently shake him back and forth. Just what the Tartarus do you think you're doing, stripping these women? Have you absolutely no decency or respect in your body at all? Give me one good reason why I shouldn't cut your balls off with a rusty spoon, ask my lady to transform you into the pig that you are, and then get you where you stand. Naruto quickly shouted, cool it, Zoe. We need to complete this quest, then you can flay Issei if you still want to do so. For now, why don't you just smack him a couple of times? He quickly created a clone that headed over to the queen's throne to try and determine where the dart came from. At the same time, Naruto unsealed 2 blankets which he promptly gave to the imprisoned Amazons for modesty. Once Zoe was done smacking Issei, she turned to look at the Amazons and helped to adjust the blankets slightly so as to better preserve their modesty. The clone Naruto made dispersed just as Zoe made the last adjustment. Naruto called out, "The angle of Decent the dart that killed Queen Sabrina took shows that it was fired from the 2nd story of Queen's chamber somewhere above the door that's opposite the Queen." Issei quickly hurried towards the center of the chamber, stopped, and then turned around so that he could look at the section of the wall Naruto mentioned. His eyes quickly scanned the frescoes, and then he shook his head. "There's no obvious hidden panel or peephole up there, Naruto. It looks like the assassin closed whatever opening they using after they fired the dart." Zoe frowned and quickly added her opinion on the situation. "The question that needs to be asked is whether the Queen was the primary target of the assassin, or if she was merely a means to try and kill us undetected." Naruto nodded his head and then turned to question the 2 Amazon captives. "All right, ladies, I know things have gone to my uncle's furnace, but I need you to be honest with me. It's the only way that we'll be able to capture whoever really killed the Queen and set off the battle we just had. Remember that Queen Sabrina was going to help me and my team to complete our quest before she was killed. We need to know 2 things. Did the Queen have any enemies among your people, and what is on the other side of that wall on what looks like the 2nd story?" The 2 Amazons turned to look at each other, silently stared at each other for a moment. They then sagged their shoulders, coming to a silent agreement. The Amazon closer to Naruto looked up at him with a defeated gaze and said, "There was some grumbling about a few of her policies, but no more than usual when it comes to royal edicts. No one in the nation spoke out against the Queen. If someone truly felt she was doing a terrible job of being queen, then she would have challenged the Queen to a duel to the death over the throne." Once the first Amazon finished speaking, the other one spoke. "The 2nd floor on the other side of that wall is a corridor that leads to a few of the offices we used to run. However, there is supposed to be at least 3 feet of brick between the side of the wall with the frescoes and the side that's attached to the corridor." Naruto nodded his head and tossed a roll of dollar coins to Issei. He then said, "All right. I'm going to check to see if there are any hollow spaces in the wall where an assassin could hide. Issei, I want you to put a coin in the mouth of every Amazon that died in here so that the ferryman will get them across the river ASAP." The leader of the quest then started to walk up the wall and tapping it. Naruto's search was soon successful when he heard a hollow sound after tapping the fresco of Aphrodite's head. He double-checked and called out, "We've got a hollow space here." Zoe smirked when she heard that news. Then without any concern for the room's market value, Naruto punched the wall, smashing in Aphrodite's head. He pulled back his fist and grabbed onto the hole he had made. Then Naruto ripped off a strip of dry wall 3 feet long and a foot wide. The dry wall was casually thrown to the floor so that it landed on an empty spot. 3 more pieces of plastered dry wall quickly joined the first on the floor to reveal a small chamber in wall big enough for a person to stand in and move about a foot left or right. There was also a small ladder built into the chamber leading up into a tunnel just big enough for a person to squeeze through. Naruto quickly entered the chamber, sent some chakra to his nose and sniffed. While nowhere near an Inuzuka's sense of smell, the half-blood was able to smell that someone had been in this chamber recently. He then turned around and looked at the Queen's chamber. This chamber offered a great view of the throne and was close to where he estimated the dart came from. The assassin was shot the Queen from here. Zoe, climb up on the wall near here and throw down some rope so that Issei can get up here as well. I'll go first up this ladder, then I want Issei to follow me with you holding the rear." The other 2 members of the quest quickly did as they were told. Zoe was happy to be going up the ladder last as she didn't want Issei looking at her rear. Naruto climbed up the ladder 3 stories until he got the end, which was an overhead door. He used a hand to steady himself, and then unsealed 2 flashbang tags. With the flashbangs in hand, Naruto quickly climbed to the end of the ladder, slammed his empty fist into the door, throwing it off its hinges, and threw the flashbangs into the opening. His free hands rapidly grabbed the ladder bars and used them to launch himself through the opening. As soon as Naruto was through the opening, he twisted 180 degrees and looked at his surroundings as he landed on the ceiling. The tunnel apparently led into some sort of closed office space where there were currently half a dozen Amazons disoriented from the flashbangs. While Issei and Zoe climbed out of the tunnel, Naruto started creating seals to barricade the room. Naruto called out, "Tie everyone up and we'll sort them out in a moment." Once Naruto was done creating the needed seals, he launched them to the doors and windows to seal to the room. He looked around double-checking for any more hidden exits, and then looked to see who needed to be secured. The 6 Amazons had all been standing close to the hidden door that the quest members had poured out of, allowing Zoe and Issei to quickly secure them. Naruto stopped gripping the ceiling with his chakra and twisted around in mid-fall to land on his feet. Issei said, "Okay Naruto, what's the plan now?" Naruto turned to Zoe and said, "You're not going to like this next part, Zoe. However, we're going to use some psychological warfare to get these Amazons to talk. Please remember that these will just be threats and not anything that will happen." A look of confusion crossed Zoe's face for a moment as she tried to figure out what Naruto was implying. Her eyes widened in shock as realization hit her. She then hissed out, "What the Tartarus are you thinking?" Naruto cut Zoe off by putting 2 fingers on her mouth. He then whispered, "Don't say anything, Zoe, or our captives might hear you. Fear is the interrogator's greatest tool, so please just trust me." He then turned to Issei and said, "And you are Germanic, follow my lead when I interrogate the Amazons, but don't actually do anything. Is that understood, Issei?" Issei nodded his head with a slightly confused look on his face. He wasn't sure what Naruto was planning, but trusted that his friend knew what he was doing. The leader of the quest started to let out a little bit of killing intent to make things uncomfortable. The intensity of the killing intent was slowly increased, and after a minute or so it woke up the now very concerned Amazons. When the Amazons woke up, they quickly realized that they were bound with a very menacing appearing Naruto standing before them. Naruto was enhancing the fear he was creating in the Amazons by using a minor genjutsu, one of the few he could pull off, that was reserved to interrogating civilian targets. This particular genjutsu was completely useless against anyone with basic ninja training, and so was kept for use on civilians. One of the Amazons started to speak, "What is?" She was cut off by a hard smack to the face by Naruto's backhand. The sound of the smack quickly got all of the Amazons' complete attention on Naruto. To help with the illusion he was projecting, Naruto focused his disgust at what he was doing into an image of disgust with the Amazons. He mercilessly said, "You worms have got me on a very bad day. I came to the Amazons to get your people's help in completing a quest that the Fates themselves personally came to me with for the safety of the West. Now I'm all for asking for help when it is needed, and I'm willing to put up with a lot to get the help needed when the occasion calls for it. However, one of you worms went and totally ruined my day, and made this quest significantly harder by killing Queen Sabrina. Having to kill allies, because of what I can only determine is an internal power squabble, pisses me off like my uncle's affairs piss off my mother. I can only conclude that at least one of you worms is the assassin, since the tunnel the assassin uses leads right here. That means one of you is responsible for this complication, and thus that worm's life is worth less than the dog shit I scrape off of my boots." Naruto used his thumb to point to Issei, who was standing nearby. "Issei here is one of my companions for this quest, selected by the Fates themselves. He's a very good fighter, but he also happens to have libido that rivals my thunderous uncle without the restraint that said uncle has learned over the millennia. I had to personally guarantee to Artemis herself my third companion's safety on this quest when the Fates also required the aid of a hunter. Now I'm bringing this little fact up because unlike Zoe here, none of you have my protection from Issei's designs on your noble bodies." To add extra emphasis to his threat, Naruto used a little wind chakra manipulation to cut the Amazons' clothes, making them more revealing without being indecent. The genjutsu Naruto had cast was turned up to its full effects as he remained silent for a time to let the full effect of his words sink in. Terror was starting to show in the Amazons' eyes as they started to clearly see Naruto's threat being carried out in their imaginations. Naruto was also using the silence to calm himself and to keep the bile from rising in his stomach. He could throw up after the interrogation was over. Interrogating was never tasteful, but at least when you used fear the target broke quicker. Once the Amazon's fear was at an appropriate level, Naruto completed his plan. I am willing to be merciful to you worms, as it is the assassin who has really pissed me off. Tell me who she is and she alone will be turned over to Issei once I am done the questioning. You will have 15 seconds after I am done talking to turn her over to me. If you do not, I will lead Zoe out of this room and let Issei enjoy your company. The 6 of you should be enough to calm him down for a few hours after he is finished. But it will be very frustrating for me to wait for you all to recover enough from him to answer my questions. As soon as Naruto stopped talking, 5 of the Amazons started to sing like a canary, just like he intended. Every Amazon except for one shouted out the name Cleo and gestured as best they could to the 6th Amazon. Cleo was understandably terrified and pissed at the predicament she was in. Naruto waited a few seconds and said, "Very well. I'll start questioning Cleo, and then I'll turn her over to Issei alone if she is the assassin. However, I'm putting the rest of you in a form of forced sleep for the questioning. If you're trying to pull a fast one on me, then the joke's on you, because if you are sacrificing one of your number to hide the assassin, I will turn your bodies over to him anyway." Naruto unsealed some blank paper and slowly started to make the seals that would put the Amazons under. He was deliberately slow with the process to increase the Amazons' fear. It also allowed him to calm down a bit so that he could keep his features and the looks they needed to be for the interrogation. Once the tags were finished, he put them on the Amazons one by one until Cleo was the only Amazon conscious. Naruto grabbed Cleo, put her on a nearby desk, and slapped a seal he quickly unsealed onto her. He then pulled out a kunai in such a manner so that she could see him draw it and see its razor-sharp edge reflected off of the room's light. Cleo's terror only grew worse as Naruto casually started to speak to her. "That seal I placed on you is fairly common where I grew up, and it's quite ingenious. You see, it stops all voluntary muscle movement below the neck. At the same time, it also sharpens your nerve sensitivity, so that a little cut like this one." Naruto paused and made a shallow cut only a centimeter long on Cleo's arm. Once she stopped screaming, he continued, "The sensitivity magnifies the pain you receive so that a small cut like the one I just gave you feels like a mortal wound. Fortunately, the same method that enhances the pain you feel also keeps you from passing out from it." He then walked to Cleo's feet, lightly running the point of his kunai over her skin so that she knew it was there, but didn't actually feel any pain. Issei and Zoe had both moved out of view and turned away, so that they didn't look at the torture Naruto was performing and thus keep their stomach contents. The shinobi calmly cut off the Amazon's shoes and pulled her socks off to reveal her bare feet. He then said, "Each toe in the human foot is composed of 3 bones except for the big toe, which is composed of 2 bones. The human hand follows a similar composition with the fingers and thumb. That gives me 14 bones that can easily be cut off of your foot, Cleo, 28 bones if I have to use both of your feet, or 56 bones in all if I have to take the time to go through your fingers as well. Now that we've had that little lesson, let me explain a few things that will either help you out or make your life even more hellish. I know that you killed Queen Sabrina, since a killer can always spot another killer. There is no chance of you diverting your fate to one of your companions. I will be asking you a series of questions which you will answer. Any attempt on your part to refuse to answer or to lie to me will result in you losing one of the bones of your toes or even your fingers if you're particularly stubborn. Once your fingers are gone, I will simply move on to pulling out your teeth one tooth at a time. On the flip side, if you do answer every one of my questions correctly and on time, I will place a seal on you that will numb your senses and prevent any chance of pregnancy before I turn you over to my companion." Cleo broke then and there, just as Naruto intended, much to his relief. Torture was the one aspect of his spy master training that Naruto absolutely despised and wished could be forgotten. However, even when one could steal valuable documents, observe enemy movements, or loosen a peon's tongue with a vice of choice, there were still times that you had to bite the bullet and put an enemy on the rack to get what was needed. No one ever said that doing what needed to be done would be pleasant or sit well with one's conscience. About the only good thing with Naruto's current situation besides the information Cleo was spewing was the fact that he could barely stop himself from puking his guts. That was good because it meant he was still a human being. It took half an hour for Naruto to ask all of his questions and write down Cleo's responses. As soon as he was done, he took out a sleeping seal and slapped it on her head. Once Cleo was out, Naruto stumbled over to a nearby trash can and started to puke. He kept heaving and heaving until there was nothing left for him to eject. Naruto then rolled over onto the floor with a queasy look on his face. Issei and Zoe walked over to Naruto, and Issei knelt down near his friend. The perverted Anis worriedly asked, "Naruto, are you going to be alright?" A groan came from the shinobi, and then he said, "Not for the rest of the day. Having to use torture to extract information always makes me sick to my stomach. I have the wrong mentality for that part of information gathering, just like my sensei. Issei, I'm sorry for using you in my interrogation. It's just that." Naruto paused for a second as he felt like he was going to throw up again. Once the feeling passed, he continued, "The genjutsu I used to work best if you are as truthful as possible to the person you're torturing. Less chance of anyone's ability to detect lies revealing the genjutsu to them." Issei scowled and said, "That might be so, Naruto. But did you really have to drag my name through the mud like that? Just because my goal is to have a harem of buxom Valkyries when I move to Asgard does not mean I'm some sort of rapist. Hell, Naruto, my mother would put me through the blood eagle if she thought I'd do something like that on a woman." Zoe was a bit confused as both Naruto and Issei shivered when Issei brought up the blood eagle. That particularly barbaric method of execution was one that they both hoped would stay buried in history. She eventually decided to let it go and asked the question that was on her mind in an icy tone. "Why did you threaten the Amazons with defilement?" Naruto was holding his stomach and looking extremely pitiful as he explained his actions. Fear loosens tongues better than pain does, and rape is something that every woman fears. Since they were bound and completely at our mercy, that fear was being pulled to the surface. I was able to make that fear all-consuming through a mix of genjutsu, killing intent, and misleading words. A look of confusion appeared on the duo's faces. Naruto used his companion's confusion to allow him to turn over and slowly stand up while using a nearby desk to steady himself. "Remember when I said that my genjutsu works best when you're as truthful as possible? Well, the way to work around it is to lie by omission, and use the truth you do reveal lead the target to a different conclusion. I did promise Artemis that I would protect you, Zoe and Issei. You do have a libido that rivals my Uncle Z's. I was also truthful about everything I said except for turning them over to Issei. While I'm sure Issei wanted to look at the Amazons' bodies, they would take my statements and give them a much darker meaning. I reinforced this with Cleo by mentioning the seal as a reward, since I can create a seal that could numb her senses and prevent any chance of pregnancy while it is applied to a woman." Those answers placated Zoe and Issei somewhat, allowing Naruto to have more time to calm his stomach down. Even if the physical pain was minimal this time, the fact that he tortured the Amazons mentally still hurt the shinobi. It was times like these that made Naruto jealous of the Yamanaka clan, since they could just go into a person's mind to find the information they were looking for. If he ever got a member of that clan as a genin student, then that hypothetical student would get all of his spy master training. Once Naruto no longer looked like he was about to puke again, he quickly copied his notes on everything Cleo had revealed. It turned out that Cleo was working with a small group of Amazons who wanted to seize power from the queen and her supporters. Furthermore, they had gotten help from a group known only as Heptad in this venture. Cleo didn't know much about Heptad. Only that they provided her group with a series of untraceable poisons in exchange for some unmarked deliveries to Gifford Pinchot National Forest in Washington and to Las Vegas in Nevada. One of the deliveries had originally come from Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, but Cleo didn't know where that package went. After all of the notes were copied, Naruto created a shadow clone and handed two copies over to it. The clone promptly headed over to the formerly secret exit and hopped down it. Issei quickly asked, "What is your clone doing with those notes?" Naruto turned to Issei and said, "He's going down to the queen's chamber to hand the notes over to the Amazons pounding at the doors. The plan is to adjust the barrier so that they can get partially into the room with the two Amazons we have bound down. They're returned as a sign of goodwill. Taichi willing, will be able to get out of here without having to kill more Amazons. I really don't want to have any more entries to make tonight." The trio of questers was able to get out of the Amazon compound after Naruto revealed the conspiracy to kill the queen to the Amazon guards, who had been using an improvised battering ram on the queen's chamber door. However, it hadn't exactly been easy to get out of the Amazon's compound, since the trio had killed a room full of guards along with torturing several other Amazons. The trio had the good sense to stay sealed in the room where they found Cleo and simply sent Naruto's clones to negotiate with the Amazons until the guards swore an oath on the sticks to let them leave the compound unharmed. Of course, the Amazons didn't let the trio leave without giving a punishment. All three of them were banned from both the Amazon lands and from using for several centuries. They would have made it a lifetime ban, but Zoe was a member of the hunt, and they really didn't want to draw too much ire from Artemis. The hunters rarely used their services, so the Amazons figured they could get away with it, and such a ban would be effectively a lifetime ban for Issei and Naruto. Everyone on the quest decided to call it a day after they were free from the Amazons. They had found the first clue to finding the Yata no Kagami, and what they had found lined up with their interpretation of the prophecy so far. Currently, the trio was camping in a public camping ground just outside of Seattle, so they could rest for the day. They could have pushed on to Washington to find the second clue, but that would have them going into an unknown situation tired at night. Zoe was currently alone at the trio's tents. Naruto had left the camping ground to go pick up something he deemed necessary from a nearby store. Issei was currently bothering some high school girls who were camping nearby. Zoe was using this time alone to think about Naruto, and the new facts she had discovered about him today. Her lady's potential husband was an extremely complex and confusing person. How could a person calmly kill a room full of people, and then turn around and pay Karen's fee for them? How does a person full of life turn themselves into a torturer, and then gets physically sick from what they've done? Did she even know who the real Naruto Uzumaki was, or had she only seen a mask? What did the answer for these questions mean for her lady? The hunter's contemplation on her possible stepfather ended when she noticed Naruto returning to the camping ground with two large plastic bags. Zoe saw Naruto head towards the woods with the bags and decided to follow him. While she figured he probably was aware of her presence, he didn't call her out on being there. That was fine for her purposes. Once Naruto was away from everyone besides his shadow, he manipulated the mist to hide his presence from any mortal onlookers. The shinobi placed the two bags down on the ground and then used an earth jutsu to create a small altar. He quickly gathered some nearby fallen branches and placed them on the altar. After the last branch was in place, he then opened one of the bags to reveal an entire side of pork ribs. The ribs were gently placed on the wood-covered altar. Naruto knelt on the ground in front of the altar and started to pound the ground with one fist, causing Zoe to feel a small earthquake as he called out, "Hey Uncle H. Do I have your attention?" Zoe's eyes widened when she realized what was going on. She should have figured out what Naruto was doing sooner, but it had been so long since she had witnessed a major sacrifice that the possibility of seeing one didn't enter into her mind. Naruto lowered his hand before him with his palms pointed to the ground, and he spoke in a somber manner. "For the sins of the Amazon guards and Amazon queen who died today, I offer this to you, Hades." He then used a low-level fire jutsu to ignite the sacrifice. Once the sacrifice was burning properly, Naruto called out, "You can come out now, Zoe. There's no reason for you to hide in the shadows." The hunter walked over from her observation spot towards Naruto. She silently observed the burnt offering and felt Lord Hades' gaze on their location. How could his gaze not be on Naruto, and thus her given what Naruto had just done? People rarely offered the Lord of the Dead sacrifice, since they didn't want his attention. If they did offer a sacrifice for a departed friend, it was typically something small like the daily offerings at camp. Zoe turned her head to see Naruto's somber face illuminated by the sacrificial flames. She then asked, "Why?" Naruto quietly replied, "What happened today should not have occurred. There were ways things could have happened today that would have resulted in far less deaths among the Amazons." The seeds of anger and grief were planted in the hearts of all those guards' families, which likely will blossom into hate in the future. The fact that they were doing their duty and a colleague betrayed their trust, resulting in their deaths, makes this result far more likely. I just hope that they are able to find peace in the afterlife. To Zoe's surprise, Naruto started to sing. Great Judge of the Bardo's gates, take heed. New souls freshly departed from this realm come to you in need. Be they peasant or noble, shadow or student, woman or man, child or parent, they come alone. Great Judge of the Bardo's gates, let them in and give them a home. Provide proper measure to the vices and virtues of each man. In this hour, Great Judge, you are the only one who can. Great Judge of the Bardo's gates, take care. The seeds of new life that you have been given are precious and rare. Naruto continued to sing until the embers on the altar died out. Zoe was surprised by the haunting and yet beautiful song she heard. It was an old tune from the Land of Fire that was traditionally sung to commemorate and send off a departed soul after the funeral occurred. Most of the song was for the soul of the dead, wishing them peace in their path to and in their next lifetime. However, the song also asked for comfort for those still living in the latter parts of the song. Once the embers had died, Naruto carefully buried them in a nearby pit to prevent any forest fires. He and Zoe then collected some more wood to put on the altar, so that Naruto could make his second offering that evening. This time, the sacrifice was to Asclepius to heal the mental scars that Naruto had inflicted on those 6 Amazons he had to interrogate. Chapter 32. The trio got up bright and early the following morning. Breakfast consisted of Pop-Tarts and granola bars with some cold tea to wash it all down. Their tents were quickly packed after breakfast was finished. Naruto and Zoe left on Bucephalus while Issei rode on Skullsplitter. It only took a few minutes for them to get to Gifford Pinchot National Forest from the outskirts of Seattle down Highway 5. When they neared the National Forest, Zoe tugged on Naruto's shirt to get his attention. Naruto turned around slightly to look at Zoe and said, "What is it, Zoe?" Thankfully, Bucephalus and Skullsplitter were traveling at speeds that allowed their riders to talk. Zoe then said, "Mount St. Helens is nearby. Lord Hephaestus has one of his workshops in the volcano, and it serves as the prison for the monster Typhon. I find it suspicious that our second clue takes us so close to that location. Coincidences do not exist." Naruto nodded his head and replied, "I have to agree with you on that point, Zoe. Unfortunately, we won't find out what the connection is until we've launched our attack." Shortly after the duo talked, the trio dismounted and hid Bucephalus and Skullsplitter in a nearby clump of trees. Zoe manipulated the mist to hide the 2 mounts while Issei carved some runes to ward off any possible threats to the duo. Naruto finished the protection of the horse and wolf by adding his own barrier seals of protection. The trio took one last look at their various protections, and then walked towards the address they had taken from the Amazons yesterday. Soon after the trio left their mounts, they quickly confirmed that the Amazons' information was accurate, as they sensed a powerful concentration of the mist that was set up to keep everyone from noticing the area. Issei stopped and had to shake his head to clear the effects of the mist. Both Zoe and Naruto paused and glanced at their companion to make sure that he was following them. Issei returned to his previous path after shaking his head, so neither of the other two said a thing. The mist was concentrated enough that it could even affect half-bloods to a degree. Zoe could ignore the effects thanks to her experience, while Naruto was simply too powerful for the mist to affect him. Hidden in the mist was a camouflaged half-buried bunker. Zoe was the first to spot the bunker, and she quickly motioned with her hand for her companions to stop. She then silently pointed out the bunker and, more importantly, the 3 surveillance cameras that were on the trees next to the bunker. The trio quickly grouped together and took stock of the camera's movements. Issei was the first to speak, and he quickly said in a whisper, "There is a blind spot in the camera's view for anything that is over 12 feet above them. I think that's our ticket in, since they haven't pruned back any of the trees." Naruto looked at the trees and frowned. "I don't know what it is, but something doesn't feel right. The security here feels very lacking for a hidden location in a forest to me. There's no hidden pruning to prevent anyone from using the trees as a path to the bunker. I also don't see any faint gleams from razor wire meshes or signs that certain branches have been sliced so that they'll break if you step on them." Zoe replied, "Most mystical locations depend on the mist to hide. The security here seems paranoid to me with how heavy the mist is concentrated here, along with the efforts to hide this bunker with camouflage. However, the security cameras are what concern me. Mortals are the only beings that use them to my knowledge." That news was concerning for the trio. How could mortals be involved in their quest? The mortal and mythical realms traditionally stayed firmly apart from each other, even though they were seamlessly woven together. While the mystical had many fronts in the regular world, those fronts as a rule switched over to mystical means when dealing with the mythical. The mixing of the two, as the security cameras hinted, was unsettling to say the least. Naruto kept his worries from showing on his face and said, "Well, I guess the only thing for us to do is to start climbing the trees, and then make our way to the bunker." Naruto and Zoe started to walk up the sides of the trees, while Issei started to climb the old-fashioned way. Once the trio was up in the tree canopy, they started heading to the bunker again. A frown appeared on Zoe's face as she senses that something wasn't right. She then pivoted on the tree branch she was on 90 degrees, and then saw something fly past her from the corner of her eye. An almost invisible dart slammed into a nearby branch with enough force to break off pieces of bark. Zoe then had to twist around so that she could grab the branch she was on with her hands and swing from it to another tree in order to avoid a second dart. The forest filled with a cruel-sounding chuckle that eerily echoed throughout tree canopy. "Those are some impressive reflexes you have, girl. Would you happen to be one of that frigid cunt's followers our Western contacts talked about? What would your mistress say about you hanging out with men? Oh wait, that's right, your Western goddess is supposed to have whored herself out to her stepbrother." Both Naruto and Zoe started to see red with the slander their unknown adversary was obviously directing at Artemis. They were able to keep focus thanks to their training and experience, but their tempers were starting to simmer. Naruto jumped out of the way of a nearly invisible dart of his own. The voice then called out, "Oh, and here is the poor pseudo-incestuous half-blood himself. Would you like some drills to help you on the wedding night? I happened to acquire a few from a job sabotaging an oil field a few months back. I can swear that if you use them you won't have to worry about breaking your laughable manhood off when you have to do your duty." Whoever was attacking the trio was apparently ignoring Issei in favor of taunting and constantly attacking the more experienced members of the trio. This would prove to be its undoing, as the perverted boy pulled out a pair of smoke bombs and threw them at the source of the voice. Those hours of peeping had taught Issei how to locate people by sound. Otherwise, he wouldn't have survived some of those excursions to look at the local nymphs. His aim was true, and the almost completely invisible being was it with smoke bombs that covered it in pink powder. Zoe quickly drew her bow and shot the apparently human-looking being in the knee with an arrow. That arrow was followed by another that hit the being in the foot, pinning it in place. A forlorn howl of pain erupted from the being. This being looked like a human teenager, but his body's outlines flickered at the edges, also like tongues of fire. Naruto summoned several clones, and had them surround the being with their kanabos drawn. The pink coloring from Issei's attack soon evaporated from the being. However, he was apparently in too much pain to stay almost completely invisible. Naruto quickly spoke out, demanding, "Who are you and just what is Heptad doing in this area?" The eyes of the trio's prisoner bulged out in shock and blurted out, "How by Lilith's tits do you know about Heptad? There's no way that a scrawny boy toy like you could find out about us." In all honesty, the boy toy comment was very lame in Naruto's opinion. It was in the same ballpark as Sai's dickless comments. Naruto's anger at those comments had cooled before pain invaded Konoha. His issues, outside of a little acting that was part of his genuine friendship with Sai, was simply the fact that it was creepy to constantly have another guy talk about his junk. Naruto directed some killing intent at the prisoner and said, "What are you and why are you helping Heptad? If you tell us what you know and the information is satisfactory, you will be allowed to live." The prisoner had a wild smirk on his face and spat in the face of one of Naruto's clones. "No dice, mongrel. I might only be a Jan, the weakest of the Dijin, but I have my honor." With that said, the proclaimed Jan bit hard on his back tooth, causing an audible crack. Massive quantities of black smoke erupted from the Jan's body, as the body dissolved into the smoke. Zoe's eyes widened in surprise when she saw the tree branches in the smoke start to dissolve. She called out, "Everyone back away." The trio quickly fled from the acidic smoke. Naruto quickly grabbed Issei since his friend was the slowest of the questers by far when it came to moving through the trees. Thankfully, the wind was in their favor, blowing the smoke in the opposite direction from where they were headed. Once the trio was safe from the acidic smoke, Naruto turned around to look at the destruction. It looked like someone had come from the sky with a massive shovel and scooped a section of the tree line away. Naruto then muttered, "So much for trying to sneak in undetected." Issei looked at the utter mess inside the bunker and muttered, "Who relieved themselves in the Norn's mead? Just how are we supposed to find our second clue in all of this mess?" Half an hour after the trio's encounter with the Jan, they felt it was safe enough to approach the bunker again. This time they came in fast and hard, expecting to have a massive fight on their hands. Instead, they entered a completely trashed bunker with over a dozen corpses. Zoe looked at the bodies, considered their positions, and frowned. "This is a mass killing. Someone killed all of these people, and must have fled the bunker using the acidic smoke as cover." A puzzled look appeared on Naruto's face. He was having some trouble getting a solid reading of the situation, since the men in the bunker were all shot. Firearms were unknown in the elemental countries unless one considered certain kunai and senbon launchers to be primitive guns. His experience on Earth with firearms was purely academic investigation on how they might be beneficial to Konoha. "How can you tell, Zoe? Couldn't these men have just killed each other with makeshift pistols? I thought I read that modern bullets have everything needed to fire a bullet built in them." Zoe shook her head as she remembered her training on firearms. The hunters preferred to use the traditional bow and arrow in their hunts. However, they all had extensive training with firearms, since hunting rifles and many other types of guns used in hunting these days fell under Artemis's domain. She quickly started to teach her companions. A modern cartridge bullet can be fired if its primer is struck with sufficient force. Such a thing is extremely dangerous for the shooter if it is not in a gun. However, such a shot is extremely inaccurate as there is no spin imparted by a barrel or even a steady grip to hold the cartridge in place as the bullet inside is fired. That's not considering the fact the explosive force used to propel the bullet can destroy a makeshift gun if it is not built to handle said force. She then pointed to the various men's hands and said, "As you can see, their hands don't have splinters from a cheap and easy to conceal makeshift gun being destroyed. Since there aren't any guns near them, that implies that some took the weapon used to kill them. Second, all of the bullet wounds are in the same location. This suggests that one person did the shooting, since if these shots were on a target it would be an extremely close grouping. Multiple people can do that, but it's unlikely given the clustering and the fact that these shoots all have the same general angle." Naruto nodded his head in acceptance. Zoe's words made sense to him, as it wasn't unheard of for an inside man among bandits to kill the rest of his companions and hoping to make a getaway. It also wasn't unheard of for bandits or even lesser trained soldiers to turn on each other thinking that someone had betrayed them. That's why one needed to be able to read the situation correctly. Thankfully, Zoe was able to examine the wounds and determine which option was the more likely. Issei spotted an open book and walked over to look at it while Naruto and Zoe tried to reconstruct as much of the events in the bunker as they could. Confusion crossed the pervert's face for a moment when he got a good look at the book, and then his eyes widened. Hey everyone, take a look at this. These books are written in a foreign language and alphabet. I could be wrong, but I think that this is Arabic. Zoe quickly walked over and looked at the open page in the book Issei had found. She nodded her head and said, "This is definitely Arabic. I recognize it from when the Heart of the West was in Constantinople. The hunt ran into a fair number of Arabic traders over the years when we had to go into the city. It was also helpful when the hunt helped to expel the Arabs from Sicily. The hunt had been a silent partner with the Normans in conquering Sicily, helping to free many women from slavery. A few had joined the hunt while many had been ferried to convents spread across Europe. They had managed to get away with it only because the Roman and Greek halves of the pantheon were quarreling, pulling most the Olympians' attention in that area." Naruto quickly asked, "Can you translate what they wrote, Zoe?" A frown appeared on Zoe's face as she thought it over. "I probably can translate what's here, Naruto. However, it's going to take some time. How much time it will take is something I can't say. I literally haven't read or spoken Arabic in centuries. I'll also have to deal with the changes in the language since that time and figure out what variety of Arabic I'm dealing with. Take all the time you need, Zoe. Issei and I can use the time that you're translating their stuff to bury them." Naruto then reached down and gently picked up one of the bodies. He didn't know whose body he was holding, and a gut feeling was telling the half-blood that he probably wouldn't like the person if he had met them while they were living. However, regardless of his feelings on that matter, they were still a fellow human being and deserved to have their remains properly disposed. Back in the elemental lands, even enemy villages would give the corpses of their enemies a proper burial after an examination to learn what they could about the other village. There weren't many visitors to Hephaestus's forges. Lesser members of the mystical world such as half-bloods and nymphs who weren't connected with Olympus typically didn't visit the gods unless summoned. Age-old wisdom had taught them that it was best to avoid gods unless one knew that the god or goddess in question was friendly to one. Even then, it was best to not pester the gods, so that their friendship did not evaporate. As to the gods and goddesses themselves, most of them tended to avoid the ugly smith. Subconsciously, they were disturbed that a fellow deity could be deformed as it offended their vanity and self-interest. A few deities didn't visit Hephaestus because the god or goddess in question focused on taking care of their domain, which had little to do with Hephaestus's domain. Over the centuries, Hephaestus had gotten used to being alone as he went about his tasks. He actually enjoyed the chance to test in ingenuity without all of the dramas and shenanigans that tended to happen to other deities. What he didn't enjoy was the fact that he was almost always taken for granted by most of his family. Most of the deities, even the very minor ones, would just send their broken things to his workshop to have them repaired without a thought. They simply expected that their valuable belongings would come back in brand new condition very quickly. There were a few gods and goddesses who were willing to give Hephaestus some thanks for his efforts when they saw him. Sometimes, they'd even come in person to ask him to repair something. Hestia was the first on that list for the god of craftsmen, and her rare orders always got first priority. Hermes also got favorable service from Hephaestus, since his brother understood what it was like to be unappreciated for doing your duties. On the other hand, deities that had offended Hephaestus or treated him poorly like Ares got the worst service that the god could get away with. Not that it particularly mattered with his asshole older brother, since the meathead always wrecked his stuff far too often. Their father wasn't the only god who hated Ares the most out of all gods. Just as Hephaestus was finishing up one project, he sensed someone enter his workshop. If he had been working on something, then Hephaestus would never have noticed his visitor. The intrusion caused the god to frown thoughtfully. Who could have entered his domain, and what did they want from him? He became even more surprised when his senses told him the visitor was a half-blood. Hephaestus turned his head to the doors of his workshop just as they started to open. Naruto walked through the door with a curious look on his face that turned into a big smile when he spotted the god of craftsmen. A puzzled look appeared on Hephaestus's face when he saw Naruto's smile. People did not normally smile when they saw him, especially when he was in his workshop. In the workshop the god could truly be himself, which meant that he didn't use any of the glamours he used while on Olympus to tone down his ugly features. Naruto called up in a cheerful voice, "Hey there, brother. How are things going for you today?" There was a blink of surprise from the god before he stared down at his half-brother in confusion. Had Naruto really just asked him how things were going? Where was the customary groveling and promises of offerings that half-bloods seemed to offer whenever they were around him when he wasn't at the winter solstice meeting? Not that Hephaestus liked those sorts of things. He could honestly care less about someone offering him a Gorgon's head or a Minotaur's horn. Sure, he could exchange those trophies for favor points, but he already made a steady amount of favor from auto-deducting his work from the other deities' accounts. As for claiming that they were unworthy to be in his presence, or some other platitude, it pissed him off since he couldn't stand someone trying to butter him up unlike his father. However, being treated like a friendly acquaintance by his mother's unexpected half-blood son was one of the last things that the god was expecting. He blinked again, and then replied in a slightly confused voice. "I'm doing well, I suppose. Why are you here, Naruto?" Naruto looked up at his half-brother and replied, "I just came to see how you're doing, brother. My quest brought me near your workshop, and since I currently have some downtime, I figured I might as well see if you were around since I haven't met you yet, brother." The god gave his younger sibling a questioning gaze. He didn't bother trying to read Naruto's mind since everyone on Olympus knew that the boy was somehow immune to divine attempts to probe his mind. As Hera's only half-blood child, and as Artemis's fiancé, the boy constantly became the center of the Olympus grapevine whenever any new fact about him turned up. Hephaestus knew all about it because he was unfortunately married to the head gossip of Olympus. Silence reigned in the workshop as Hephaestus tried to read Naruto's body for any signs that he was after something. The god's excellent eye for detail when it came to his craftwork was also good at reading people's expressions when he put his mind to do so. That wasn't very often, but this was a special occasion. As Hephaestus expected from what he had heard, but still found hard to believe, was that Naruto was telling the complete truth. Hephaestus then shrugged his shoulders and said, "Well, it's good to meet you, Naruto. There's really not much for half-bloods to see here, and I have several orders that I need to get taken care of now. Is there anything on your mind? I need to get back to work soon." Naruto nodded his head, but the usual confident and determined look was gone. There was a great deal of determination on his face, but also some nervousness masked beneath it. He looked up at his divine half-brother and asked, "Is there anything I can help you with here in the forge, brother? Zoe told me that it will take a few hours at least to get things translated. If you're willing, it would be nice to spend some time with my brother." For the life of him, Hephaestus wondered where his mother had scrounged the celestial bronze needed for Naruto when he was born. She must have a hidden supply of celestial bronze somewhere, because he knew the amount of the divine metal in storage to the gram over the past 600 years. Half-bloods don't ask if they can hang out with gods. It was just an unwritten rule that everyone knew and understood. There were occasionally half-bloods who foolishly sought to have a place on Olympus because they thought their deeds made them equal to the gods. Hephaestus frowned and examined Naruto even more carefully. He found no sign that Naruto's request was fueled by pride or a sense of self-importance. He did recognize the look in Naruto's eyes, but he couldn't remember seeing that look on anyone that lived on Olympus. A second later the god remembered that he had seen the look in Naruto's eye among the mortals he occasionally observed while courting his mortal companions. It was the look that a younger siblings gave to their older siblings when they wanted to spend time with them. It was a surprising thought for the god. Hephaestus was willing to admit that he was not an admired god. He was respected for what he could make, but he was not someone that people liked to spend time with. He had a face that not even his mother could love. However, the god found himself not thinking badly about his mother as much anymore since she had become friendlier with him over the past couple of centuries. That friendliness had practically exploded over the past decade or so, which he suspected had something to do with Hera's time as a human. A sudden realization hit the god. He liked the idea that Naruto wanted to spend time with him because he was the half-blood's brother. Naruto wasn't trying to get in his good graces, he just wanted to be with his brother because of who he was and not what he was. A small smile appeared on Hephaestus's face and he said, "Sure, Naruto. You can start by getting 20 ingots of celestial bronze from that stock over there for me." That night the 3 quest members had gathered around their camp for dinner that Issei had gotten from a nearby restaurant. Issei was sporting a visible hand print on his cheek from annoying a waitress way more than advisable. Skullsplitter was sitting at Issei's feet enjoying the remains of his T-bone steak snack. Bucephalus was laying a little ways away from the trio, and happily munching on a bag of apples that Naruto had unsealed for him. Zoe finished her meal, and then put the plastic tray in a bag, so that she could put it in a trash can later. She then looked at her companions and waited for them to finish their meals. The hunter had to fight off the urge to shake her head in disbelief at what Naruto had done. She really shouldn't be surprised that Naruto had gone off to visit Hephaestus just so he could spend time with his brother. Yes, it wasn't something that normal half-bloods did or even thought about doing. However, this was Naruto that she was considering, and he left normality back in his original world if he never knew it. Once Naruto was finished eating his meal, he turned to look at Zoe and asked, "Were you able to translate those books, Zoe?" Issei stopped eating to turn and look at Zoe as well. Both boys had left the hunter alone for most of the day, so that she could translate the books. They had stopped by from time to check on her, but mostly she was left alone as everyone did their own thing. Zoe nodded her head and replied, "I have translated the books." It was a little tricky since there were actually 2 different varieties of Arabic. Most of the books were from mortals who were from a few villages in Syria. Those books were mostly useless for our purposes. The mortals all thought that they were part of a terrorist cell preparing to deliver a nuclear bomb somewhere in downtown Los Angeles. They also thought that they were here to prepare the bomb's delivery system with a secondary plan of trying to detonate Mt. St. Helens if they were found out. Naruto's eyes widened, and he quickly cut in. The so-called nuclear bomb that the mortals were preparing for must actually be the Yata no Kagami. I'm also willing to bet that Heptad, who is leading this group, is really trying to target Hephaestus, since he has Mt. St. Helens as one of his preferred forges. Zoe nodded her head. That is where the second and older variety of Arabic is from in the books I read today. There weren't many, so I think that Heptad was trying to keep their planes as verbal as possible. However, they did have to put some things into writing, and their writings were in an older variety that I was more familiar with. As you guessed, Naruto, the group's main plan at this stage was to try and use the Yata no Kagami on Lord Hephaestus to test its effects on the Olympians. Once the test is complete, they were planning on going to Los Angeles and use it on the hospitable one. The mortals were building a device that was supposed to amplify the mirror's effects and make it easier to use. Issei had a worried look on his face as he spoke up. "How much does this device amplify the mirror, and where is it? I don't recall seeing any major device in the bunker that could be mistaken as a nuclear, not that I really know what such a device would look like." Zoe smiled and said, "Taichi was kind to us in this matter. There were several faults in their initial design, forcing them to break apart the entire setup a few days and wait for new parts before we came here." Naruto nodded his head and commented, "That's good news for us. However, I am still confused at something. Why did Heptad kill all of the mortals in the bunker, and who was also in the bunker? He couldn't figure out why someone would kill a comrade, since that was one less person to help you achieve your goal. Not that he was particularly sorry that the mortals were dead given what they had hoped to do. Zoe simply stated, the mortals were dead men walking. Heptad was going to execute them once they had served their purpose. My guess is that whoever the other person in the bunker was decided to get rid of them when the base was discovered and their sentry exploded. Do either of you know what that sentry could have been? I have never seen something like that anywhere in the West." The resident ninja quickly shook his head, but Issei had a thoughtful look on his face. Both of his companions turned to look at the group's pervert. After a minute, Issei said, "I think I have heard about Digins before. If I remember correctly, they're a group of beings that live on outskirts of the South Realm. My grandmother once mentioned a group of beings made of fire, who lived in the south who could eventually regenerate from a spark of themselves. She could have been talking about Digin, but I'm honestly not sure. Silence ruled for a few minutes until Zoe spoke up. I suppose that will be something else we'll have to learn about later. The good news is that I was able to get the location of the base where Heptad is currently keeping the mirror. Naruto nodded his head and said, "That's good, Zoe. Given the lead time our enemy has had to escape, I think we can safely assume that our unknown member of Heptad has alerted his compatriots in their second base. Let's get some rest, and then move out tomorrow to try and find clues about their next move in their base." The other two members of the quest glanced at each other, and then nodded their heads in agreement. Any enemy with 2 brain cells would have abandoned the second base, since it was mentioned in recoverable intel in the lost base. The trio then cleaned up the campsite from their dinner. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfictions. Looking forward to having you on board again.